far, whenever we get into the realm of emotions and memories, we're talking about a certain type of brain state that can be worked and can be changed. So let me go back for a moment. So far, I've talked about embodied emotions. I've talked about the idea that there may be overlap between emotions and physical pain, and the superimposition of emotions and physical pain. And what I've observed clinically is that whenever people interact with the emotions, the emotional memories underlying pain, the pain itself can change. And this is something that's supported by the research done by Dr. Vamyapkarian that the AVO app is based on. So let's look at this idea in a bit more depth, because I really think it's important. Whenever you have an emotional memory, that emotional memory is not set in stone. That emotional memory can be changed at any point with new information. You always have the ability to change memories, change how you experience memories. You may have the same memory, like the facts are the same, but how you feel about it changes. And that's really what I'm talking about here. So if we look at pain as an emotional memory, an embodied emotional memory, one of the first steps is just to take a step back and look at how any emotional memory is created. Whenever a memory is paired with a strong emotion like fear or anxiety or sadness or guilt, it's encoded more strongly in the brain because the brain assumes that it's important. Fear memories are very important for the brain to remember. So it puts a lot of resources into remembering these. So whenever you have a new emotional experience, and again, the addition of emotion is the thing that makes the memory most powerful. So you have a new emotional experience to create learning. Within 4 to 6 hours, protein synthesis starts to begin in the brain to hardwire that memory. That protein synthesis triggers a series of events that lasts about 2 weeks in the hippocampus. And after about 2 weeks, you now have a long-term memory. You can add to that long-term memory over time. You can deepen it. You can, almost like a web, you can add more extensions to it as you reinforce it. But all of those extensions essentially make it more efficient, easier to reach that memory, easier to engage that memory, easier to use it, and they make it more resilient and strong. So in a sense, whenever, if anyone who's listening to this, whenever your pain began, your brain was doing the right thing. It said, if it were to talk, it said, this is something really important. We're experiencing pain. We need to remember this. Let's make a strong emotional memory to make sure we remember what happened, to make sure we know what movements are safe, what situations are safe. Let's build a memory. So this has happened for all of us. And what I just explained here in a little more detail is what is shown here. That initial learning experience, that initial learning really only lasted a few hours whenever your pain began. But every time the pain repeated, it refreshed this period here. It refreshed the strength of the memory to recode it and encode it more strongly. So what you get after you've had pain for months, years, decades, is a really strong long-term memory that's stored in different parts of your cortex. Because it has an emotional basis, it follows the rules of emotional memory consolidation and reconsolidation. Because it's an emotional memory, this memory can be fundamentally changed by re-evoking it and introducing new experiences that violate that memory. This is the ingredient. These are this is the recipe for changing deep emotional memories. This can be done in little bits across a long period of time, or in more intense experiences like flooding or exposure therapy. But I really believe by understanding how this works, every single person has the ability to choose whether they want to reinforce a memory in their brain or whether they want to change it. So the reason why I'm explaining this in so much detail is that in the hope that one day you won't need someone like me to help you understand how to reframe and rechange your brain and introduce new neuroplasticity, you'll have the understanding to do it yourself, because you're really the most important piece here. You don't need me as a gatekeeper to tell you. Once you understand these principles, you can do it for yourself. So neuroplasticity, I've said this before, but neuroplasticity, what it does, it either strengthens a memory, or it degrades a memory, or it reshapes a memory, or it creates new pathways, new memories. So what we want to focus on here is the last two, because we don't want to strengthen the pain. We do want to degrade, but we don't want to just make it weaker over time. We'd kind of like to rechange the whole memory. So let's focus on the reshaping and the establishing new pathways. What I'm about to discuss is the reshaping. The establishing new pathways is new learning. This is introducing new experiences. This is moving more. This is taking new routes to work. This is creating new habits. This is deciding to not avoid something the way that you've avoided something so much before, out of habit. This is breaking new habits, creating new habits. So part of this is always creating new input so your brain adapts to a new reality, essentially. So we're going to focus on this reshaping, but also I want you to remember that this establishes new pathway point here is all about new learning, which is if you want to change what your brain will look like in 3 months, in 6 months, part of that has to be introducing new patterns into your daily life that you want to reflect your new reality, because that's what your brain will learn. Your brain does not remember who you were 10 years ago. Even if you really want to return back to that internal vision of who you were and just how perfect it was and you could move so much more, or 20 years ago, your brain doesn't, that's a memory too. Your brain is really only focused about what's happening today and what's about to happen. That means that whatever you feed your brain today and what you anticipate doing next, what's important to you, that's shaping what your brain is going to look like in 3 months, 6 months. And although I haven't mentioned this in previous meetups, all of the changes in brain function and structure that are seen with chronic pain can be reversed within 6 months whenever you reduce pain and whenever you introduce new patterns. So there is nothing your brain has experienced that can't be fundamentally changed. And I really want to emphasize how empowering this is. You are not stuck with a pain brain. It's literally what you feed your brain. That's what your brain is reshaped into, which is why the retraining, the new learning, the unlearning, why people keep on using these terms, these are all accurate, but unlearning doesn't tell you what to do next, doesn't tell you what to do, what new things to try. So we'll get back to that in a moment. So let's first look at reshaping the existing pathways. One of the cool things about emotional memory is that the process that was used to create the memories happens again in the exact same way every time you re-evoke that memory. This is called the reactivation, memory reactivation phase. And you'll notice, just like in the very beginning, you have an acquisition phase of about 4 hours or so. It happens again, 4 hours. This is, for instance, this could be a pain flare. Whenever a pain flare occurs, that's an example of this. But this could also be an emotional memory. So I don't want to just talk about pain here. This is a really flexible concept. So even whenever these new emotions come up, out of nowhere, you have a really nice fertile period to change how you see even, emotional patterns that have come up. But let's keep to pain here. This could be a pain flare. This could be just reinforcing the everyday level of pain that you have. So whenever this emotional experience is reactivated, and by saying this, I'm sort of implying also, it's not just the pain, but it's the emotional suffering with the pain. That is the memory reactivation. So maybe whenever you have pain, not all the time do you have that really intense suffering that comes up. But what that means is whenever you have the pain with the suffering that comes up, you have a really fertile opportunity to change how that memory is restored and re-encoded. You have a fertile period here, about 3 to 4 hours. So what do you do during that 3 to 4 hours? Because whatever you do during that sweet spot here is going to solidify. It's going to start a new process of protein synthesis that either strengthens what just happened or it changes the structure of the memory. And in 2 weeks, you're going to have a whole new brain, in a sense. So you can, even if you just deep breathe and reduce the amount of sympathetic activation that you're experiencing during this period, the memory, the emotional memory, will be re-encoded as less intense. So bare minimum, just deep breathing, for instance, when you have a pain flare or whenever pain starts to increase, just deep breathing is a way to wear down the strength of that memory. You can also do a little bit more. You can introduce new information that contradicts what you expected. For example, if you are able to, during the middle of a pain flare, find a comedy or some sort of video that makes you laugh, and you sort of inject some sort of positive emotion, that is something that conflicts with your expectations of what a pain flare is like. Maybe you have a tough pain day and you decide to see a friend and you really allow yourself just to focus on feeling connected to that friend. You're violating that expectation of what the pain will be like. And at an emotional level, what you are also doing, and I'm going to go back tons to this guy, you are taking a memory that has an imprint with all of these negative emotions, and you are introducing positive emotions or neutral emotions to it. So there is actually a little bit more nuance to this recipe than what I've described before. And that is by whatever means makes sense to you, introducing positive or neutral emotions to the pain experience will fundamentally change the emotional memory of pain. You can interpret this in a lot of ways. One could interpret this as, if I feel pain, just try and every day to experience more positive emotion. That would be one way of getting at this. Another way of getting at this would be during, the times whenever pain is the roughest, specifically seek out positive emotions, which I know that's difficult. But one of the ways I wanted to describe this that I feel is most effective, especially with neutralizing really intense emotional and physical pain during pain flares, is practicing self-compassion. And I use the word self-compassion rather than self-love because I think people in our society are not taught to self-love, and it takes a few years, at least in my experience. It's not, so compassion maybe is like it's a step on the way to self-love, but this is really self-compassion, self-love. So in the moments whenever pain is really intense, what are the ways that you can introduce some tenderness, some softness, some kindness to yourself? that is a contradictory cue that your body and your mind are incorporating into this pain experience. Before, whenever pain flares would come up, it's just been bad. And now all of a sudden you have a pain flare that comes up and there's tenderness and self-compassion and more neutrality. That is changing the structure of the emotional memory underlying pain. That is changing how the pain memory is stored in your brain. So then the question becomes, what method is most effective for you? And that's very individual. I put a picture of an empathic pet here just because even if it's a challenge for us to feel empathy and compassion for ourselves, pets are often the greatest teachers. So, even whenever we're in rough situations, they're taking care of us and we aren't even aware of it. But also thinking about how you treat your pet, how you love your pet, that's an example of compassion. Whenever you're sick with the flu, that's an example of how a lot of people naturally give themselves compassion that they wouldn't give themselves otherwise. Even thinking about your pain as a child that you're holding in your arms is one way to give yourself compassion. And at higher levels, if we were to give like a pro tip, the pro tip here is being able to, in parallel, both experience the suffering as you experience love and sort of shine love on the suffering self. So this is also possible, and I'm explaining this because it might not think it's possible unless you hear about it. But it is also possible to maintain a dual consciousness where you both feel everything in your body, you feel how awful it feels, you feel all the sadness and the anger, you feel all those things. And then there's a part of you that's just loving that. And that love superimposed on the suffering neutralizes the emotional memory as well, very effectively. So the stronger the positive emotion you can experience while experiencing the physical pain, the more effectively you can neutralize that emotional memory. However, you can do this in little steps across time. You don't have to do this is a matter of, what feels natural to you, what feels meaningful to you, what feels honest to you. So whatever level of this you can work on is the level that you're at. This will be included in the thing that I send out, but the idea is to allow a little bit of the pain and the fear to come up, maybe 5 to 15 minutes of it before adding the positive emotion. And the reason I say this is because you want that underlying emotional memory to be activated fully as possible. You don't have to let it play out completely, but by letting it sort of blossom up for a little bit, you're making sure that whatever you're superimposing onto it, you're really getting the underlying emotional memory effectively. And so what this requires is an openness to experience emotions that don't feel good. One of the things I really advocate is a self-care plan for after you do this, because there's a difference to, okay, I'm about to feel some heavy stuff versus I'm about to feel some heavy stuff, but after I feel it, I have a care plan. I'm going to be in my pajamas. I'm going to have my snacks. I'm going to be on the couch with a big plushy blanket. Whatever your definition of self-indulgence is, I'm going to order out whatever it is that will make you, play your favorite music, surround yourself with your family, whatever makes you feel comfy and secure and safe at the end of the day. You put that after these exposure sessions because then whenever you're going into it, you know that you're going to end up fine. You're going to end up in a comfortable place. And that gives a sense of security to where you have a little more courage to go into the deeper stuff because you know it's going to end up okay. Because you already have the plan, you already planned out, and you have it planned out in a way that is exactly how you would want it. If there's an exact type of ice cream you like, you have it in the fridge before you even start. You have it all planned out. You know exactly how the evening is going to end, and it's going to end awesome, even though you went through all this stuff. So that's also part of the self-care process. And even breathing, again, I've mentioned this before, deep breathing, although it's a frustratingly simple type of advice, is the most effective way to activate the parasympathetic nervous system and is more effective than any medication, any treatment, and it acts quicker. It acts within just a few seconds. So one of the reasons why you keep on hearing people talk about deep breathing over and over again is because it's really effective. So even if you don't even want to interact with where the pain and the fear came from, just deep breathing through this process and making sure that your nervous system is more chill at the end than whenever you began, that memory will be re-encoded over the next 2 weeks as less strong than it began. So even just deep breathing through something is a way to reduce the strength of that memory, because you're reducing the fuel to the fire, the sympathetic load, how aroused you are. And because I know that there are some nerds here, what that specifically does is it reduces the activation of the basolateral amygdala, which is involved in the volume control for how strong emotional memories are encoded. So that is literally turning down the volume of the basolateral amygdala as you're experiencing the fear and the pain. And whenever that memory is re-encoded, the basolateral amygdala has now reduced the sympathetic volume of that memory. And the next time you experience it, it'll be a little more dampened. So you can even just by deep breathing, you're doing that. So I'm going to stop talking and open things up. Yes, 4 hours is the magic time. And all the reason why I mentioned the 3 to 4 hours is that you can also use this organically. For example, if you have an emotional event that comes up and it came up out of nowhere, that's whenever it comes up into your consciousness, that's time 0. What that means is for the next 3 to 4 hours to take it easy, because whatever else you're introducing into your field after that would be stacked onto that emotional memory. So whether this is something you do within the context of pain or just in life, whenever you have a big life event that happens, take 3 to 4 hours afterward and keep yourself as chilled out as possible, as relaxed as possible, to minimize the strength of that emotional memory. And that's a way, for instance, if you even have a new emotional memory that's formed, you can minimize how strongly it's encoded.
And I might have just missed it, and I'm sorry about that, but can you just kind of identify exactly what you mean when you say like that moment 0, like the emotional memory? Like, what are we looking for? Is it when pain starts to flare up? Is it an actual like stressful situation happening in our life? Like, what is that moment?
So there are a couple of things here. Let me share the screen to bring back that visual. So I have discussed this with the guy, Kareem Nader, who is responsible for discovering memory reconsolidation. He's a neuroscientist who's up at McGill. And although we don't know exactly the timing Time zero is whenever whatever it is comes into your conscious awareness. Someone could argue that if you're primed, something has already started to come into your conscious awareness. Like maybe you've been, for example, if you have been in a well, let's keep it with pain. If you've had low level pain all day and you've been working to sort of reduce it, minimize it, but then you start to feel a flare coming on, for example. The moment whenever you start to feel the flare coming on and you have the, excuse my French, the oh shit response, like, oh, that's time zero. It's whenever the panic button starts to go on. And although this is theoretical, whenever I've discussed this with Karim Nader, who is the guy who thought about this, that did the original experiments on memory reconsolidation, based on what we see in animals, from that oh shit moment, the peak of the memory is within 30 minutes to an hour after that, meaning that from the conscious awareness, there's a series of events where your brain is starting to fire off all of these what ifs, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs, what ifs. And the response isn't over. So the memory is being triggered. All of those synapses, all of those pathways are being activated and starting to be activated for 30 minutes to an hour after that starts. That is assuming that nothing has been done to curb them. And in this case, you wouldn't necessarily want to curb them. You want to let it run for a little bit. You might not know what it is. It might just be an emotion. It might be a nameless emotion. All of a sudden, you're and I bring this in just to reinforce that it could be pain or it could be emotion. For instance, if you're just sitting there and all of a sudden you feel some dread. There are a lot of people I've talked to recently who have woken up with feelings of dread or high anxiety, and it does not make sense. It's not coming from anything, but it's a really strong emotion. That's a time zero where you start to feel just this really strong emotion come on. So this could be pain. This could be the beginning of a flare. This could be a really strong emotion. This could be an argument with someone that just happens organically. It could also be if you're putting time aside to, for instance, work on some of the early life memory, graphing things that we started with, where you're looking back at patterns from early life and you start to sort of chart those out, and then you look on it and you reflect on it, and then you start to get that emotional feeling of like, this really happened to me. This was reality. That would be time zero. So it's not only time zero of what you're experiencing now, it can be time zero of the reactivation of very, very old memories. What this means is that first 30 minutes to an hour, there is lots of machinery going on in the head that's revving stuff up. And we don't really know how long that lasts. For instance, I don't have any idea how long that lasts if you effectively curb the fear or the thought. I don't know. It could continue to run for 15 or 20 minutes, even after you've curbed the thought, and it takes the whole system a while to catch up. So that's one of the reasons why the 3 to 4 hours is a very, very, very generous estimate of since the first hour especially is essentially the memory being reactivated in your mind and all the pathways being activated. The response to that is from hour 1 to 4, in that we don't know how long it takes to rev up, but regardless of how long it takes to rev up, we have a 3-hour cool down period that's scheduled. I also understand that sometimes things come up in the middle of the day and you don't have like just 3 hours just to cool down. You have, there's life that's coming up. And so in that sort of situation, if that happens, you might want to revisit it toward the end of the day. But still, if something really strong comes up that really triggers you and you have space for it, I always advocate taking the space, taking a break, and allowing it to de-escalate a bit in your body. That's a much more successful strategy whenever you have time for it than pushing it down and repressing it down, because repressing it down is still allowing all of that stuff to run. It's just you're not aware of it. And that's one of the things, whenever people are talking about the difference between distraction-based strategies and reframing-based strategies versus allowing emotions to come over. If the distraction has worked, if the reframing, the restructuring of the thought has worked, then you won't have the emotion come up afterward. So the emotional response that comes up afterward is a sign that that strategy, the cognitive strategy, wasn't enough in this case. Sometimes the cognitive strategy is enough. And in those cases, sweet. But in cases where you still feel something with you, you still feel something in your chest, like you're still holding on to it, that's whenever, the emotional, the compassionate witnessing of emotions comes into play. And ultimately, for a lot of these emotions, they may or may not have stories associated with them, but just letting them pass through, and if you superimpose them with some sort of positive emotion, they pass through more quickly, I've seen.
Yeah, I think I was, as you were speaking, I was wondering if I'm getting into a type A pattern, so to speak, that, okay, I've got this 3 to 4 hour window of time. So I really better get into a positive state, as that, so I can associate that state and, repattern my brain, so to speak, with respect to the pain. And so it's like, oh my gosh, I've really got to do this. If I don't do it in 4 hours,
Okay.
I missed an opportunity.
I'm glad you expressed this, because the beauty is that if it doesn't work this, if today your nervous system is in such a state where it just isn't happening, it next time is just as effective. And the thing is it really, depending on how this works, you can completely repattern some memories in just one session. So if it doesn't work this time, you have another time to try. And that might also be part of the process, where it's just, working with, even if you're able to minutely reduce the strength this time, that's fine. Or if you're able to learn something about yourself, about what's not getting in the way, but like what, there are lots of reasons to, for instance, if it, use it as an opportunity to study yourself. Is there resistance? Some of these patterns we're holding on to for a reason, and maybe we're not ready to let them go. And that's okay too. Just being aware of that is something to consider. But there's never just, you have as many windows of time as you want. I couldn't understand how maybe like you want to be efficient, you want to do it now, you want to be as effective now as as effective as possible now. So if you know this about yourself, perhaps creating just baby steps about, okay, the first time I'm just going to deep breathe and see how that feels. So set it up as a series of experiments where you can also see, because there's no, for each person, there'll be a different, I don't know, sort of set of ingredients for what'll be best for soothing you, for helping your memory, for helping you have peace with that memory. And so, for instance, you could plan out a series of experiments like, okay, the next 5 times this thing happens, first I'm going to focus just on deep breathing and see what that feels like. The second time, I'm going to focus on this other thing and see what that feels like. So you've given yourself 5 different, or, in number of tests to explore. And each time you're just focusing on something very simple. You don't have to, and the goal is just to observe how effective it is for you. So I think that might be a bit better. And I totally understand your perspective, because I'm very much the same way. So in a way to set yourself up for success, take the pressure off by giving yourself multiple like I'm going to try this 5 or 10 times, and then focus on something slightly different each time and see which feels easiest to you. You could even make a note afterward. Felt really, I didn't feel like I deep breathed today, and it felt like that much didn't happen. Okay, this day I decided to focus on this type of positive emotion, or I just watched animal videos for the whole time afterward. And even though I'm not really sure if that worked, I feel a lot better. So because even though I wasn't focusing on it intently for the 3 to 4 hours, I notice I'm in a good mood now, and I watched lots of things that made me feel good. So therefore, even by not focusing on it, I figured out a strategy to increase positive emotion, which indirectly changed the emotional content of the, so it can happen a lot of different ways. You don't have to be engaged in, and it's probably better to not be engaged in the content of the emotional memory the whole time. So you don't have to, it doesn't have to be a focusing task. In a sense, we have a short period of focusing, and then finding which set of neutral or positive emotional experiences afterward can help keep me at neutral by 3 to 4 hours.